"You have no business being in this family," my mother-in-law said the night she handed me a garbage bag with my clothes inside. "A woman who can't hold down a job and embarrass us in front of our friends is no wife of mine son's." 3 years later, I walked into her garden party as the keynote speaker she'd paid $15,000 to book. She didn't recognize me until I was already at the microphone. "My name is Leanne, and I need to take you back to the beginning, because the ending doesn't make sense without it. I married into the Caldwell family on a Saturday in October, in a ceremony at a country club in Westchester that cost more than my parents' car. My husband, I'll call him Preston, came from old Connecticut money, the kind that doesn't talk about itself at dinner but makes sure you feel it in every room. His mother, who insisted I call her by her first name but made it feel like a test I kept failing, ran the family's charitable foundation and sat on 3 nonprofit boards. His father had retired from corporate law, his sister had a marketing career and a husband who played golf with the right people. And then there was me, Leanne Marsh from Akron, Ohio, first-generation college graduate, daughter of a man who drove a UPS truck for 30 years and a woman who taught 3rd grade and made the best peach cobbler in Summit County. Preston and I met in grad school. He was getting his MBA. I was getting my master's in nonprofit management, which his mother once described at dinner as so sweet, studying charity. I loved him then, or I thought I did. He was attentive when we were alone together, curious about my opinions, proud to introduce me to his friends. The version of Preston I met at 26 was different from the one I lived with at 29. The shift was subtle at first. A comment here: my mother thinks you should dress a little more professionally at events. A suggestion there: maybe don't share that story about your dad at work parties, it kills the room. I shrank myself by degrees, the way you don't notice a slow leak until the tire is flat. The job situation was the real wound between us, though no one said it directly. I had been working as a program coordinator at a mid-sized nonprofit in the city, focused on workforce development. I loved the work, I was good at it. But the pay was nonprofit pay, $52,000 a year in New York, which sounds more than it is when you're paying rent on a 1-bedroom in Queens. When Preston and I moved in together and then married, I continued working, but his mother made remarks. Not cruel ones, not outright. Just the particular kind of disappointed observation that rich women of a certain generation have perfected. Most of the women in our circle do something more entrepreneurial, or they focus on the foundation work. The social services path is very admirable, of course. My boss put me on a performance improvement plan 8 months into our marriage. It wasn't entirely fair. We'd had a major grant fall through and the organization was restructuring, but I was the one holding the bag. I was let go on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I remember sitting in my car outside the building for 40 minutes before I could drive. I told Preston that evening. He nodded slowly. He said he was sorry. And then he said, "Maybe this is an opportunity to reassess what you actually want to do." Which was code, I understood later, for "my mother thinks you should stop working at organizations like that." I spent 3 months applying for new positions and being rejected. The nonprofit sector was contracting. The corporate roles I applied to didn't want someone with my background. I was doing consulting piecemeal, making almost nothing, telling myself it was temporary. That's when the dinner happened. His parents had a spring gathering every year. About 30 people, a catered event at their home in Greenwich. I wore a dress I'd bought on sale at Ann Taylor. I thought I looked nice. His mother looked at the dress the way you look at a scratch on a new car. The trouble started when a man named Gerald, some kind of investor, asked me what I did. I explained my consulting work. He asked with whom. I named the organizations. There was a pause. "Oh," he said, "so still the social sector." I made the mistake of defending it. I said something about the impact the sector had, about the policy work, about how workforce development directly connected to economic mobility. I was not rude, I was not loud, but I was articulate and direct, and I did not apologize for my background. Later that night in the car, Preston said, "You made Gerald uncomfortable." I said, "I disagreed with him." "You embarrassed me," he said, "in front of my parents' friends." That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't see it that way yet. The next 6 months were quiet in the way that a room gets quiet when a storm cutting. Preston traveled more for work. His mother called him, not me, to make plans. When I asked him what was happening between us, he said I was being paranoid. When I asked if we should try counseling, he said he didn't think they needed to pay someone to listen to me talk. The night everything came apart, I had just gotten off a 3-hour call with a former colleague who'd referred me to a small arts nonprofit looking for an interim director. It was promising. I was excited for the first time in months. I walked into the living room to tell Preston. He was on the phone with his mother. He didn't hang up. He held up one finger the way you do to a child. When he finally ended the call, he said, "My mother thinks it would be best if we took some space." I thought he meant a weekend, a few nights. He meant our marriage. The papers were already drafted. I found out later that his mother had referred him to her own attorney 3 weeks prior, the prenuptial agreement we had signed, which I had not fully understood at 26 and had been encouraged to sign quickly because it's just a formality, everyone does this, gave me nothing from the marriage. We had been together 4 years, married for 2.5. I walked away with my personal belongings, my student loans, and a savings account with $4,300. His mother was there the night I packed. She stood in the doorway of the guest room while I put my things in boxes, and she said, "You were never really suited to this life, Leanne. I hope you find something that fits you better." She said it kindly. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about afterward, the absolute kindness of it. I moved into my college roommate Deb's second bedroom in Hoboken. She had a futon and a cat that hated me, and she never once made me feel like a burden. I paid her $600 a month because that's all I could afford, and she charged me $600 a month because she knew that's all I could afford. The first 2 weeks, I barely left the futon. By the third week, I needed money. I took a job at a Panera Bread 2 blocks from Deb's apartment. Morning shift, 5:30 to 1. The manager was a 22-year-old named Corey who ran a tight operation and didn't care about anyone's backstory. I made $13.50 an hour and came home every day smelling like bread and soup. I was 31 years old with a master's degree, and I was crying in a Panera parking lot on my lunch break more often than I'd like to admit. But something happened in that parking lot. I started listening to podcasts, business ones, finance ones. The kind I had never bothered with because I'd always thought of money as something other people managed. I'd been raised to think you worked hard and you paid your bills and you were grateful. I had never been taught that money was a tool you could wield intentionally. The first podcast that cracked something open in me was about a woman who had built a 6-figure consulting practice from her living room with 0 startup costs. She talked about positioning, about knowing what problem you solved and charging accordingly, about the difference between a job and a practice. I knew something about workforce development. I knew the language of grants and program evaluation and community impact. And I had spent 2 years inside one of the wealthier family networks in the Northeast, watching how money actually moved, which organizations got funded, which causes were fashionable, which board members carried real weight. That knowledge was worth something. I just hadn't thought of it that way before. I started writing. Not a business plan, not formally, just notes on my phone while I commuted on the PATH train. What did small nonprofits actually need that they couldn't get from their existing consultants? What did I know how to do that they would pay for? The interim director position at the arts nonprofit came through. It was a 6-month contract, $68,000 prorated, and they needed someone to stabilize operations after their executive director had left suddenly. I gave notice at Panera on a Thursday. Corey shook my hand and said, "I always figured you were here for a reason." The 6 months at that organization were the best professional experience of my life. I was running something. I was making real decisions. I restructured 2 staff roles, renegotiated a vendor contract, and wrote a capacity-building grant that brought in $85,000. At the end of my contract, they asked if I'd stay permanently. I said no, not because I didn't love the work, but because I'd started to see what was possible beyond it. A board member there, a woman who ran her own communications firm, asked me over coffee what I was planning next. I told her I was thinking about starting a consulting practice. She put down her cup and looked at me like I'd just said something worth paying attention to. "What's your niche?" she asked. "Helping small nonprofits build the operational infrastructure they need to actually scale," I said. "Most of them have a great mission and terrible back-office systems." She handed me a business card. "Call my office. I have 3 clients who've been looking for someone like that for over a year." I called the next morning. Within 4 months, I had 5 paying clients. I was working out of Deb's living room and billing at $125 an hour, which felt audacious and was, I later learned, still below market rate. I moved into my own apartment in Jersey City, a 1-bedroom with actual furniture I bought new, not from a curb, and I sat at my kitchen table the night I signed the lease and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years, stable. The business grew faster than I expected. I had been underestimating how hungry small nonprofits were for exactly what I was selling. I brought in a part-time bookkeeper. I partnered with a graphic designer for the materials side. I started getting referrals. By the time I had been running the practice for 18 months, I was grossing just over $200,000 annually. I reinvested heavily. A real website, a professional headshot, a business coach who helped me raise my rates and fire 2 clients who were draining more than they were paying. I started speaking at regional nonprofit conferences, which led to invitations to larger ones. That's when the TEDx invitation came. A regional conference organizer who had seen me speak in Philadelphia asked if I'd be interested in doing a TEDx talk on sustainable funding models for grassroots organizations. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I spent 3 months preparing that talk, 17 drafts. I practiced it in my bathroom in my car to Deb on her couch while her cat judged me from the armrest. The talk was 12 minutes long and I wrote and discarded more material for it than I had for my entire master's thesis. I delivered it in March. It went online the following week. Within 10 days it had 60,000 views. Within a month it had 400,000. My inbox became something I needed a system to manage. That was how I got on the radar of a speakers bureau that specialized in philanthropic and corporate social responsibility events. Within 6 months of the TEDx posting, I was booking engagements at $8,000 to $15,000 a talk. I want to be clear about something because I've been clear myself about it. I did not become successful to prove anything to Preston's family. In the beginning, yes. There were nights when I imagined his mother's face when she found out, when I pictured showing up somewhere and watching her realize what she had dismissed. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't fuel at some point. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, the goal changed. It became about the work itself, about the women who came up to me after my sessions and said things like, "I've been trying to get our board to hear this for 3 years." About building something with my own name on it that had nothing to do with whose dining room I'd failed to be good enough for. The call came on a Tuesday morning in May. I was reviewing a proposal for a new client when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was the executive assistant to the Caldwell Family Foundation, my former mother-in-law's organization. They were hosting their annual leadership summit for women in philanthropy, a 2-day event at their estate in Greenwich. The assistant had been given my name as a recommended speaker by 3 separate sources. The speaking fee they were offering was $15,000. I asked her to email me the details. I read the email 3 times. The event was exactly what she described. My former mother-in-law's name was at the top as founder and chair. The venue address was the same house where I'd packed my boxes. I thought about it for 4 days. I talked to Deb, who said, "You already know what you're going to do." I talked to my therapist, who asked what I needed the experience to give me. I talked to a man named Garrett. No, a man. I need to step outside the story for a second and just tell you. I had been seeing someone for about 7 months at this point. Someone I'd met at a conference in Chicago. He was a social entrepreneur who ran a youth mentorship program in Detroit. He was patient and funny, and he had a way of listening that made you want to tell the truth. When I told him about the invitation, he didn't tell me what to do. He just asked, "Who do you want to be when you walk through that door?" I accepted the engagement. The morning of the event, I drove myself. I didn't need a driver. I know that's a detail, but it felt important to me to arrive in my own car under my own power and park in a lot I paid for with money I had earned. I wore a steel blue blazer I had bought specifically for high-stakes speaking engagements, the kind that makes you feel like your spine is 2 inches longer. The event coordinator met me at the entrance and walked me to the green room. I had been to this house many times. I knew exactly where the kitchen was, where the back stairs led, which bathroom off the hallway had better lighting. I knew these things because I had lived adjacent to this world briefly as a guest who was never fully welcomed. Now I was on the invoice. I was doing a mic check at the front of the main reception room when I heard her voice. My former mother-in-law. She was greeting a group of guests near the entrance, doing what she did beautifully, making people feel noticed, remembered, important. She moved through a room with a particular kind of authority that comes from never having had reason to doubt yourself. I watched her work the room for a moment. She hadn't seen me yet. When she turned and our eyes met, she stopped mid-sentence. I watched the sequence of recognition move across her face. First the automatic social smile, then the slight tilt of confusion. Then there it was, the full realization of who I was and why I was standing at the front of her event room with a lapel microphone already clipped to my blazer. She crossed the room. To her credit, she did not flee. "Leanne," she said. Hello, I said. I kept my voice warm, professional, the exact register I use with event hosts I'm meeting for the first time. She looked at the microphone. She looked at the program in her hand. She looked back at me. I didn't realize. Your name was listed as Leanne Marsh, I said. I went back to my name after the divorce. It's cleaner for the business. There was a pause. The kind that takes up more space than silence usually does. You've done well, she said finally. It came out smaller than she intended. I have, I said. I did not say thank you. I gave my talk to 112 women, 40 minutes on building funding ecosystems that don't collapse when a major donor exits. I had 3 specific case studies, 2 of them involving organizations in Connecticut. I was precise and practical and occasionally funny. I got a standing ovation that I did not expect and stood at the front of the room for a moment afterward, with my hand pressed flat against my chest, just to feel my own heartbeat. My former mother-in-law started the applause. I don't know if she did it because she meant it, or because the room required it, or because something in her recognized she owed me that much. It doesn't matter, she started it. Afterward, at the reception, I spoke with a dozen women who wanted to discuss the ideas from my talk. A foundation director from New Haven asked for my card. A program officer from a national funder said she wanted to bring me in for their staff retreat. Preston appeared at the edge of the room about 20 minutes in. I hadn't known he would be there. He looked like himself, just slightly less certain of it. He had a drink in his hand and he stood at a slight distance, the way people do when they haven't decided yet whether to approach. I let him come to me. You look great, he said when he got close enough. Thank you, I said. I heard your talk. You were really good. I know, I said. He laughed, a little uncomfortably. I didn't expect. I know, I said again. There was nothing hostile in me when I said it. That's the part I want you to understand, because I spent a long time expecting to feel rage when I saw him again, and what I felt instead was something more like clarity. The way a room looks after you've taken a piece of furniture out and you finally see how small it made the space. Take care of yourself, Preston, I said, and I meant it. Then I turned to speak to the woman who had been waiting patiently at my elbow for 3 minutes. I left the event at 5:30. On the drive home, I called my dad, the way he always does, like he's been waiting to hear from me. I told him where I'd just been. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Baby girl, he said, I hope you were kind. I was, I said. Good, he said. That's the only part that matters. The man I was seeing proposed 7 months later. Quietly at home, over a dinner we had cooked together in my apartment, his turkey chili and my grandmother's cornbread recipe, which requires more steps than any cornbread has a right to require and is worth every single one of them. He got down on one knee in my kitchen while the oven timer was still running, and I said yes while the cornbread was still in the oven, and we let it go 4 minutes too long and neither of us cared. We married the following spring in a small ceremony at a state park in New Jersey, with 30 people we actually knew and loved, including Deb as my maid of honor and my dad, who danced so enthusiastically at the reception that I was genuinely concerned for his knees. No prenup. Not because I was careless about it, but because we talked about it openly and honestly, the way adults are supposed to, and we built an agreement together that made sense for both of us. That conversation was more intimate than the entire last year of my first marriage. I think about that woman in the Panera parking lot sometimes, the one crying into her phone between shifts, smelling like tomato soup, trying to figure out what she had left. I don't pity her. I don't even entirely recognize her anymore. But I am grateful to her for not staying on the futon, for picking up the podcasts, for taking the call from the board member, for saying yes to the TEDx organizer, for driving herself to Greenwich in a steel blue blazer. She didn't know, that woman in the parking lot, that the people who had dismissed her would one day pay her to stand in their living room and teach them something. She had no way of knowing that, but she kept going anyway, and that was enough to build everything else on.